So this is the 2012 Unit 2 or Theme 2 exam. So although it's not new syllabus, it still has many parts of the syllabus that are exactly the same as what you need to know for economics, so still very useful to be doing these past papers. Okay, starts off, gives us information saying that real incomes are falling. It shows us that unemployment is at a 17-year high. It shows us that there is a difference between the measurements of unemployment. They're giving us different answers, and that young people are a lot of the unemployed and all this type of stuff. So very negative, quite a depressing start there. With reference to extract 1, explain the difference between real and nominal income. Right, I look at extract 1. I say that nominal incomes have risen by 2.3% up to 2011, but real incomes have fallen by 0.8%. So nominal saying that income's gone up, but real saying that income's gone down. Why is this? Well, real income takes into account inflation, which currently is at 4%, whereas nominal income does not take into account inflation. Therefore, nominal income could be rising, but real income could be falling because one takes into account inflation while the other one does not. So I give the theory and I use some numbers from the extract, 4 marks. A2. With reference to the extracts and your own knowledge, explain 2 causes of falling real disposable income. Right. Well, the first cause is that inflation is quite high at 4%. Therefore, you could say the aim of the government is to have inflation at about 2%. 4% inflation is quite high. Therefore, as inflation is high, any pay rise that consumers have would have to be above 4%. Otherwise, they'll actually be losing money and their income will fall. And as the information tells us here, the average pay rise was only 2.3%, which means that that's way below inflation, and so therefore incomes are actually falling because everything's getting more expensive. That's one. Second one, let's have a look down here. Oh dear, unemployment has risen to a 17-year high. Well, how is that related? Well, we should know that as unemployment goes up, that means consumers on average have less disposable income. Because if you ain't got a job, you don't have much income. You got to live off them benefits. Therefore, that's another reason why average real income has fallen. Question 3. Assess the likely impact of falling real incomes on the price level and equilibrium output. Illustrate your answer with an aggregate demand and supply diagram. Right. Well, if incomes are falling, that's going to push down consumer spending. Therefore, AD is going to go down. So I'm going to draw a supply and demand AD graph, and I'm going to show AD falling. What does that do? Well, as AD falls, that means the average price of products should also fall as well because demand is going down, and also consumers are going to buy less, so the amount that they buy is going to fall as well. But it does say assess the likely impact of falling real incomes. So what you could also say is, although incomes are falling, it in theory should push AD down. The idea is, if you remember, the government should have what are called automatic stabilizers. The government should have spending in place so that if unemployment's going up, they are meant to be spending more in order to try and help those that are unemployed. Maybe they're going to spend more on training schemes to get consumers training and out there and getting jobs. Maybe they're going to spend more money on benefits to help those who are unemployed. Whatever it is, government spending should go up when unemployment goes down. So actually, that might reduce the effects of that falling aggregate demand. That's our evaluation point. With reference to figure 1 and extract 2 and 3, distinguish between the claimant count and the ILO measure. Right. There's 2 different ways to measure unemployment. One is the claimant count. This is simply the amount of people who are claiming job seekers allowance. The ILO figure, however, is usually higher, and that is a survey that is done a phone survey that's done that finds out about how many people are out of work. And as you can see here, the ILO figures say that there's 974,000 young people unemployed, and this is higher, in fact, than the government's official statistics. And we can look here. The ILO figure, we could say, is putting unemployment at around 2.5 million, whereas the claimant count's putting unemployment at around 1.5 million. So you see there's a difference between the two, because those that are claiming benefits are not always the only people who are unemployed. You can still be unemployed and not claim benefits. Therefore, ILO is generally seen as being the more realistic of the two. With reference to Figure 1 and Extract 2 and 3 outline two possible reasons why the trends in the claimant count rate and the ILO measure of unemployment differ after 2009. So, what is the trend? Well, in 2009, we're seeing the claimant count went down slightly, and it actually says here that it's telling us the number of people claiming job seekers allowance. So basically, there is a difference. There's a massive difference. There's over 1 million people's difference. One reason you could say is that those that are claiming unemployment benefits are not the only people who are unemployed. There might be a lot of people who are unemployed, who are looking for work, but they don't want to claim benefits, or they don't qualify for claiming benefits. Maybe they're too proud, or they've got money saved up and they don't feel like they want to be taking money from the government. So that could be one reason. Another reason is that it says here the ILO survey should make sure that full-time students who cannot find a part-time job while they are studying are not included in this measure. So the ILO survey actually does include students within the survey, whereas the claimant count does not. So that's a big difference here. The ILO survey does include those who are students who also are looking for work, whereas the claimant count does not include students. So if you're at uni, for example, full-time student, and you're looking for part-time work, you could count as being unemployed by the ILO survey. So that's another big reason why there's a difference, because one takes into account young people who are students who are looking for work, whereas the claimant count does not. Moving down to the next question. With reference to the information and your own knowledge, examine two factors which might explain the rise in UK unemployment since 2008. So this question is actually quite nice, because it's just simply asking you two factors that cause unemployment and why it's been going up since 2008. Now, it does say, using the information and your own knowledge. Well, you should know that since 2008, during 2008, there was a large recession, which meant that GDP fell massively. There was a lot of unemployment. So what you could say, why has unemployment risen since 2008? Because there was a big recession during 2008 and 2009. This caused aggregate demand to fall massively as consumers had less income. As aggregate demand was falling so much, this then caused supply to fall, because demand had fallen and supply has fallen. Therefore, redundancies were made. Businesses did not need as many workers because they weren't producing as much, because demand was not there. And because the recession was so severe, because it lasted for so long, it has taken a long time for the economy to recover. So this is why unemployment is still very high. That's one factor you could say. Another one you could say is that the UK economy relies a lot on exports, and we import and we export. And perhaps one reason why there's a lot of unemployment is that businesses who export abroad may be finding that there has been recessions in many countries around the world. If there are recessions in other countries, then they will not demand imports from the UK, which means demand for products from the UK goes down, which means AS goes down, and people lose their jobs because they're not producing as much. Third point you could say about why there is high levels of unemployment is that perhaps the government has cut spending on benefits and helping people into work. And so if the government has cut spending because since 2008 they're trying to reduce their deficit, their government spending, they are reducing provisions that they have in place, those supply side policies to reduce unemployment. Therefore, they're not spending as much to help people to get back into work. So that's why unemployment is low. Now the final question, evaluate macroeconomic policies which may be used to reduce the level of unemployment. Now it is 30 marks. You're not going to have a 30 mark. You will have a 20 mark question. So I will treat it as if it is a 20 marker. There are three main macroeconomic policies. Those are fiscal, supply side, and monetary policy. They each work differently. I'm going to start with fiscal policy. Fiscal policy involves government spending and taxation. Its role is to influence aggregate demand. If the government was using inflationary fiscal policy, this is when they spend the amount of spending increases compared to the amount of tax. So they spend more than they were before, or they reduce the amount of tax. Or maybe they're doing both. So expansionary fiscal policy, inflationary fiscal policy as it's sometimes known, means that they're trying to spend more and increase aggregate demand. Now, how's that going to reduce unemployment? Well, if part of expansionary fiscal policy is that they reduce income tax, this means that consumers will have more disposable income, they'll spend more, which then has the effect that businesses will then supply more because AD will go up, and by supplying more they'll need more workers, so that pushes unemployment down. Another thing might be that the government decides that it is going to spend more money to help the economy in some way. For example, we could talk about supply side policies, so the government could spend more money trying to increase the supply of workers. They could spend money on training schemes to help people get trained to get back into work. Another thing the government could do as a supply side policy is they could cut the amount of benefits that people receive. The idea behind this is if you cut benefits, that means you're going to earn less money on benefits, so it forces people to try and get back into work. So we've got fiscal policy, we've got supply side policy. Monetary policy could also be used. If you use monetary policy, it means that maybe the Bank of England could cut interest rates. This may encourage businesses to borrow more money. It increases business confidence. They will invest more. More investment means more supply, which means more jobs are available. However, we will have to evaluate these policies. Sometimes the policies may help to reduce employment. They may increase unemployment. Here is the mark scheme. There are many different answers you could have given. Let's focus on the evaluation ones. Here we're saying if the government cuts tax, so income tax, that people would spend more. That's true, but it depends on whether by cutting tax, consumers spend more or if they decide to save the money instead. So if you cut tax and consumers, instead of spending the extra money, they simply save it, then that's not going to have much of an effect on reducing unemployment. So it depends on the marginal propensity to save. You could say cutting interest rates would be ineffective if, remember, cutting interest rates by the Bank of England, banks themselves don't necessarily have to follow what the Bank of England does. So just because they reduce interest rates, it doesn't mean other banks will as well. Therefore, the effects won't happen within the economy. You could discuss things like the multiplier. So more government spending leads to a multiplier effect. But it depends on the level of the multiplier, because if we have a lot of saving within our economy, then the multiplier will not be very large, so the effects won't be felt.